A note to listeners, American Hustlers was created from in-depth research and reporting, public records, and the opinions of participants. The views expressed do not reflect those of Frequency Machine, its affiliates, licensees, or employees. In some cases, names were changed to protect the privacy of those involved, and all subjects are presumed innocent until proven guilty. This episode also includes some violent and sexually explicit content that may be triggering to some. Listener discretion is strongly advised. Previously on American Hustlers.
So to your knowledge, did Thomas White molest any underage boys?
No, not at all.
My partner Julie dug into Danny Garcia's lawsuit against unsuspecting billionaire Thomas White and found that it was likely all an elaborate con. Danny's case against White was notable enough that People magazine did an article about it, which in turn led to Kaushal Narula tracking Danny down.
He asks if he can buy me a drink. He tells you how he's the exiled prince of Nepal and that his family had been massacred.
Kaushal introduced himself to Danny as Nepalese royalty, and that story was a big part of what was likely his first con on American soil. He was accepted to the New College of San Francisco, and with that came a student visa.
At the school, people called him a prince. He was a man of wealth and taste from his home country.
Soon, Kaushal was doing more elbow rubbing with the school's administration than going to class. His visa was in jeopardy, and to keep it, Kaushal promised New College a $1 million donation in exchange for class credits. But even though he was presenting to some as royalty, his living conditions were hardly highfalutin.
He was sleeping on the floor on a thin mattress and wearing, not that great of clothes, and he had this ugly fucking rug on the wall.
Thomas Ivana was Kaushal's roommate, so he'd know. But after moving out and ghosting for a few months, Kaushal returned.
Came back with these brand new $500 white leather shoes, and he had all this fucking money.
And now, Julie and I want to know, just where on earth did that money come from?
If you wish to accept this prepaid call, dial 0 and hold. Thank you.
Hi, Doc.
Hi, Danny. How are you today?
I'm hanging in there.
Last episode, you heard a recorded phone conversation with Danny Garcia from prison.
I don't even know where to begin.
He described Kaushal Narula dressed head to toe in Armani, living large at the Four Seasons, and making grand plans involving a submarine.
While Kaushal was in Hawaii that summer, he bribed this Navy admiral, millions of dollars to smuggle Tom out of Mexico.
Tom is, of course, Thomas White, the San Francisco philanthropist that Danny had helped land in a Mexican jail on sexual assault charges. Now, as Julie and I have journeyed through the making of this podcast, we've learned that Kaushal spins tall tales. Submarine-assisted jailbreaks? That's about as tall as they come. However, typically, the tales have an air, albeit a very thin air, of truth to them. For example, was he a prince of Nepal? No. Did he hail from Nepal? Yes. So, what about Hawaii? Was Kaushal there in 2006? Yes, he was. Did he bribe a Navy admiral while there? No. But he did find a new mark. She was a shy, conservative mother of two from Osaka, Japan, and we're going to call her Keiko. Keiko was in Hawaii for a summer vacay. And normally, here's where I'd cut to my interview with her. But unfortunately, things got, complicated. More so than usual, which, for this show, says a lot. Hi, I'm looking for... Another thing Julie and I quickly learned is that telling a story that began nearly 20 years ago had some challenges. Hi, is this...
I'm trying to contact...
One of them being that no matter what lead we were chasing or which con we were investigating, finding people tied to the story was extremely difficult.
Oh, wrong number?
Some people we wanted to talk to were 6 feet under. Many people that did talk to us would only do it off the record. And other victims were either too ashamed, embarrassed, or scared to go public. Then there were others. Okay. Many others.
Hello?
Who very quickly hung up on us. Son of a bitch. And Keiko? How do you go about finding one woman in all of Japan, a country with 126 million people? The short answer, not easily. If I were looking for someone in the States, we've got some pretty good tools to find people. They'll search social media, addresses, and phone numbers. But none of those would work in Japan. I only had one lead I could try. After Tyson's story came out, Keiko emailed the authors. Miraculously, I discovered that email address still worked. From there, though, it took 12 months and 73 email exchanges for the interview I'd been hoping for to disappear like the money Kosal had stolen from her.
Hello?
Hi. So I heard back from Keiko, and it's not the news we wanted. She is requesting that I tell her story.
Really?
Mm-hmm. She doesn't want to do it. So my answer to her was, of course, yes, because better that than nothing at all. But obviously, I can't interview myself. So you need to interview me, and then I'll tell you Keiko's story.
All right. So I'm you.
Yes. For an episode, you're me.
Fairy tales do come true, Kim.
I'm Kim Cantner. Go, Julie.
Hold on. What's happening right now?
And that's Julie Golden. This is American Hustlers, presented by True Crime News. Did we do it?
I think we did it.
Fuck, we rock.
Okay, can we back up for a second? How did you even find Keiko in the first place?
So on our big contact grid, there's a note on there about a lawyer who had a client in Hawaii.
Right, the one that thought Kaushal had, like, supernatural powers?
Exactly. So I started by emailing him. 3 times to be exact. I never heard back, and because I can't take a hint, I called him.
Hello, my name is Kim Cantner, and I'm a television producer.
I told him I was calling regarding Keiko's case, and he replied by saying,
I think you've been emailing me, and I haven't been responding because the court file has enough information for you.
That's not him, by the way. That's our producer, Avi, because even though I tried to explain...
The thing about a podcast is we don't want to read court files if we can help it. We'd like to talk to the people that were involved.
He very quickly and emphatically said he was not at all interested. And before I could thank him or even say goodbye... That's just great. So contacting Keiko through her attorney was a hard no. But I was able to get my hands on the court documents Keiko's lawyer referred to. It was from a lawsuit Keiko filed against our favorite person, Kaushal Narula. It was 146 pages full of legalese, but empty in regards to contact information. Luckily, I had an email address. I gave it a try, crossed every finger and toe that I had, and waited.
What'd your email say?
I just introduced myself, told her about the podcast, told her we were, interested in possibly speaking to her, and if she was, open to that, then to call me back, and said that I hope to hear back. Nothing. So 2 weeks later, I sent a follow-up email, and then the other day, I got this very brief email that said, Hello, Kim. Thank you for contacting me. Could you give me more information about yourself, projects, present situations, etc.?
Wow.
So I wrote her back, and I just dumped all this information on her. I told her where I grew up and that I work in TV and that I'd spent some time in Japan and that I studied the language. And even though I've forgotten a lot, blah, blah, blah. Then she wrote me back and she said, actually, I was very nervous to get your message at first, so I needed time to reply. The incident was the most awful experience in my life, and I still can't breathe when I recall. It's like PTSD. After going through your information, I now feel I should talk to you. I am happy to find that you've lived here, so you know Japanese people well. Do you have Skype? And then she signed it Yoroshiku Keiko, which means it's just a more casual way of saying goodbye.
Oh, wow.
Sounds like I was making great headway, right? But in reality, it had taken 4 months just to get Keiko on this first Skype. How are you? Genki desu ka?
Good.
Keiko was so hesitant to talk that I told her we didn't have to discuss Kaushal at all. And so, for the first 48 minutes, it was straight up small talk.
And how are cherry blossoms this year? Were they good
And
or
then,
not good?
very organically, she began to talk about the time she spent on Oahu.
So can I ask you, and if you don't want to answer this is fine, but I'm curious.
Based on the court documents, I knew just enough about Keiko's story to ask semi-informed questions. And once we started talking about Hawaii, the floodgates opened.
I know that you and Narula were staying in the same condo complex, but how did you actually meet?
Keiko told me the whole horrific, sordid story of how a chance meeting at the condo where they were both staying in the summer of 2006 altered her life forever. She was conned not once, but twice by Kosal and Narula.
So I will keep emailing with you.
Yes.
And then before I share anything, I promise you first get to tell me if it's okay. Arigato. Okay, matane.
It's been months since my first call with her, and we've stayed in communication. We've Skyped 3 times, and our email chain is now up to 87. But it was right around email number 75 where Keiko decided she wasn't down with her voice being on the podcast. She was emotionally torn between taking her power back by sharing her story and the fear of having her voice on the internet forever in a country where she'd trusted the wrong people. Was I also the wrong people? I kept trying, but eventually...
We end up here.
Yep.
Okay, well, I need to start at the beginning. There's a lot here. How exactly did Kaushal and Keiko meet?
So, from what Keiko told me, she spent time in Hawaii in the summers, and she was staying at this condo, and she used to go to the swimming pool and the sauna pretty much on the daily. And she said there were other people from the condo down there, and she said they all just kind of became friendly. And then she started talking to Kaushal, and eventually she expressed she really, really wanted to spend more time in America, but, because I'm a Japanese citizen, I can only spend X amount of weeks, before my visa runs out. And he was like, oh.
Kaushal explained that the best way for Keiko and her 2 children to be able to stay in America as long as they'd like would be to get what's called an EB-5 visa. An EB-5 visa allows international investors to obtain permanent U.S. residency. All Keiko had to do to get one was invest in some real estate, and fortunately, Kaushal happened to know about a handful of properties in Hawaii that would be perfect. The thing was, Keiko didn't actually want to own real estate in Hawaii, so she politely declined. Then, conveniently, Kaushal's story morphed. She didn't actually have to invest. It just had to appear as though she was going to. And she could do that by establishing a mailing address and opening a bank account with a minimum balance of $500,000. If she did those 2 things, he'd connect her with an immigration attorney who would take care of all the necessary paperwork to secure her visa.
It's remarkable to me that Kaushal manages to sweet-talk people without any sort of deep personal connection.
Yeah, I know. He does, though. He definitely does.
And then, you got Danny, who requires a deep personal connection, with Thomas White or Tyson, But with Kaushal's marks, I'm kind of unclear what it is.
Yeah, I do think in Keiko's case, she had a lot going against her. English was not her first language, and he was a good talker.
Whether it was Danny conning those he knew well or Kaushal conning an almost perfect stranger, the results were the same. Innocent people whose lives were turned upside down.
So what happened next?
So Keiko did as she was told. She opened a mailbox so she could establish an address in Hawaii. And then Kaushal took Keiko to the bank called the Bank of Hawaii. And according to her, the employees at the bank were fast friends of Kaushal. They all assured Keiko that Kaushal was a very important man. He had money, and that, kind of helped her confidence in him. They exclaimed that he was a trustworthy businessman, and that he was in very good standings with the bank.
This is weird, right? This is not just me. This is weird.
It's weird. So Keiko went through the process. She was signing, bank forms out the wazoo. And during the signing, Kaushal took 3 of the temporary checks for himself. And here's the thing. Japan doesn't do checks. So she didn't even know they existed in the first place, let alone that they were missing.
Oh, so interesting. So there weren't the usual red flags maybe built in for her that we would have here.
Exactly. And he probably knew that and took advantage of it.
The next day, Keiko wired $256,000 from her account in Japan to her new Bank of Hawaii account. A few days later, Kosal forged Keiko's signature on one of the temporary checks he stole and transferred $8,000 from Keiko's Bank of Hawaii account directly into his Bank of Hawaii account. It cleared easily. The bank never even bothered to compare the signature on the forged check with Keiko's signature on file. 5 days later, on August 29th, 2006, Keiko and the kids, who remember were in Hawaii with her while Kosal was laying his trap, flew back home. Mere hours later, while Keiko was likely in the air, Kosal forged a second temporary check, this time for $95,000. Again, signatures were not compared and the funds were transferred. A few days later, as Keiko was settling back into her life in Japan, she sent another wire transfer to meet the $500,000 minimum Kosal told her she needed in order to apply for her EB-5 visa. In total, she'd transferred $555,000. But stealing Keiko's money wasn't the only thing Kosal was up to. For some reason, Kosal was busily texting with Danny Garcia.
So I don't understand, why are Kosal and Danny texting each other at this point?
I mean, I think that's the million-dollar question. I guess part of me feels like they were both cut from the same cloth a bit. You know, they saw opportunity and marks in anyone that they crossed paths with that had money. And so to just kind of check in with each other to see what the other one's up to and how one of them could ride the coattails of the other into, into richness, for lack of a better word, is worth their time and energy. What do you think?
Yeah, the devil you know.
Right.
Keep your friends close, but keep your grifting friends closer.
While researching the case, we actually got our hands on some of Danny and Kosal's communications. For reasons unknown, Danny shared a fairly long IM chain with Tyson. And you can see Kosal and Danny's dynamic right away. Kosal.
How you been?
Danny.
I'm okay.
Again, not actually Kosal and Danny's voices. Kosal.
Okay. How come just okay?
Danny.
So, my lawyer stole almost all my money. I've been in court yet again since April trying to get it back.
Kosal.
What? Now suing lawyer? You never listen to me. We could have moved money and you would be in Monte Carlo with big fat boats.
Danny.
Yep.
Kosal.
So why don't you listen to me and act and get me the info? Let the professionals handle this.
Kosal wasn't just sounding like a supervillain. He was certainly doing his best to act like one, too. To date, he'd stolen $103,000 of Keiko's money. 11 days later, there was another check-in between friends. Kosal.
What's going on with your life? And what's Mr. White up to?
That's a reference to Danny's former lover, Thomas White, who he'd made millions off of by fabricating charges of sexual abuse. Danny.
No news.
Kosal.
What do you mean, no news? Know any place he's hiding his mullahs?
Danny.
Who knows?
Kosal.
You need an evil bitch like me to make you do it.
Danny.
Just testing the waters.
Kosal.
Danny, you don't test the waters in this. You take the whole bulk, then run.
Here's what's weird to me. Like, Kosal obviously sees, I would imagine, a potential mark in Thomas White, right? He's like, let me get a piece of that. But I believe if Danny's a true con man or criminal, he must smell the con on this guy.
I mean, maybe there was enough there in that initial meeting that Danny felt like, this is somebody I need to keep in my circle for reasons maybe not yet known.
Somehow there is a mutual using of one another going on. That's all I know. I just don't believe there's some genuine, wonderful friendship at this core.
I don't think so either. And I don't know if it's even using yet, but I think the potential for using, they both smell in each other.
Yeah.
The instant messages go on and on, tossing out scenarios on how Kosal and Danny might get their greedy little hands on Thomas White's fortune. As far as Julie and I know, nothing came of it. But one thing is for sure. They were in contact, and every conversation seemed to revolve around the pursuit of one thing: money. And to continue to feed his insatiable need for it, Kosal was still working the con on unsuspecting Keiko. Just a few days after this exchange with Danny, Kosal contacted Keiko, who was still back home in Japan, and asked her to send him a couple of permanent checks that she'd received. He said that the immigration attorney needed to verify that she had an address in Hawaii and an account in the States with a minimum balance. Keiko sent Kosal 3 blank, unsigned checks. You can probably guess what Kosal did next. He forged one of those checks for $405,000. Same deal. Signatures not compared, money went from her account to his, no questions asked. I guess this is what Kosal meant when he told Danny, "You don't test waters in this, you take the whole bulk, then run."
How did Keiko get wind something was awry?
Oh, man. So, on October 2nd, which was like a month and a couple of days after she'd left Hawaii, Keiko had not received a bank statement, and she was a little concerned. So she called the bank, and she was told that $508,000 had been transferred out of her account.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. So she obviously exchanged many words with the bank, and it all ended with the bank telling Keiko that she needed to come back to Hawaii if she wanted to pursue the matter further. And the next day, she got on a plane because that's $500,000.
Yep, that's exactly what I would have done.
Keiko demanded to know who on earth had authorized the transfer of the money out of her account, which is when the bank, as politely as possible, I'd imagine, informed her that she did. Or at least the money was transferred via 3 checks that supposedly had her signature on them. Keiko knew at that point exactly who was behind it. The person she trusted to help her, Kaushal Narula.
What happened when she went to the bank?
She asked the bank to call the police because, as she saw it, this was a crime. But Keiko claims that the bank was like, no. We don't need to get the police involved. We fully acknowledge that these transactions were forgeries. And then the bank immediately froze Keiko's account and Kaushal's account while they investigated the incident. So then Kosal obviously gets wind of things because his account's frozen. And then Kosal went into the Bank of Hawaii and informed the employees that he was going to return Keiko's money. And a bank employee told Keiko Kosal was not a bad person, his parents were Nepalese diplomats, and that he would absolutely return her money.
Somebody from the bank told her that?
Yeah.
So who's this bank person? Was it a real bank person or was it somebody pretending to work for the bank?
No, it was real bank employees. There were names listed in the court documents. As much as the bank was allegedly reassuring Keiko, so was Kosal. He claimed he merely borrowed her money, knowing his Nepalese family funds were due any day. Keiko wasn't buying it, and her next stop was the Honolulu Police Department. She met with an officer who listened and was very kind. But after he spoke with the bank, Keiko was alarmed. She said the investigator's line of questioning shifted to whether she willingly gave her money to Kosal. Keiko denied this as strongly as she could. A police report was filed, and the detective went on to tell her they just needed more time to investigate the matter fully. Keiko's confidence in the police was slipping, but she didn't know what else to do. So she returned to Japan, having no idea how to tell her family about the situation. Days passed, and all Keiko was hearing from Hawaii was crickets. She was beside herself. Then, 2 weeks later, Kosal contacted Keiko and threw her a life preserver. You see, she didn't need to wait for the bank to replenish her funds because his much-anticipated family fortune was being transferred within days, and he would pay her back every dime once the transfer was complete. Kosal told Keiko she needed to fly to San Francisco to help complete the transaction. He also sweetened the deal, saying not only would she receive her funds in San Francisco, but while there, he'd introduce her to the attorney for the EB-5 visa. 3 days later, Keiko flew to San Francisco. She opened an account at a Wells Fargo bank for the sole purpose of receiving the transfer from Kosal, and agreed that once she'd been paid back everything he owed her, she would withdraw the claims at Bank of Hawaii. Kosal then sweetened the deal even more. Not only would he repay her, but he'd deposit additional money to clear up the problems between them. The grand total of the deposit was $890,000. So basically, everything he'd stolen from Keiko, plus an additional $382,000.
But that was a total lie, right?
Actually, no.
Wait, what?
Yeah, I know. He did it. He deposited the money.
You're telling me that a mom from Japan actually managed to foil Koshal's plan to con her out of $500,000?
Not even remotely. In fact, paying Keiko back wasn't the start of things getting better. It was the start of them getting way worse. Keiko, a young mother of two from Japan, thought she'd had a stroke of luck when she started a friendship with one of her neighbors at a vacation rental in Hawaii. She'd been looking for a way to spend more time in the U.S., and suddenly she'd met a new friend who promised he could help. All it would take was a tiny little matter of putting $500,000 in a brand new bank account. Unfortunately for Keiko, that neighbor was Kaushal Narula, and 3 forged checks later, he'd stolen almost every cent. But when Keiko confronted Kaushal and the bank where the fraud happened, a funny thing occurred. Kaushal apologized and promised to pay her back, plus interest. And then he actually did. But this is Kaushal Narula, so there's no way it could be that simple.
So what happened from there?
So as it turns out, the $890,000 deposit that Kaushal made into Keiko's Wells Fargo account was deposited on a Saturday. So when Keiko called the bank to confirm there was a deposit made for the amount he said, she was told there was. But it was pending. And due to the deposit being made on a Saturday and due to the amount of the deposit, she was told that her funds would not be available for 3 working days.
So he's stalling. He has no money. Now this is starting to sound more like the guy we've been researching.
Exactly. It was completely calculated on his end. And he also took it to the next level, and he told her her own safety was at risk.
Wait, what? He threatened her?
Well, Kaushal didn't threaten her directly. He told her that his sister in Nepal had been kidnapped, and that the kidnappers went on to threaten Kaushal's safety. And he said since his life was in danger, so was Keiko's, just because she was around him.
Well, that's kind of brilliant. That's a way to threaten her without threatening her.
I know. His whole story was Kaushal was keeping her safe. And obviously at this point, she also knew that the deposit was pending at her bank.
Wow.
For Keiko, it seemed as though the wheels just might be back on the bus with her finances. And for a night, even her social life was looking up. Kaushal extended an olive branch by picking Keiko up in a chauffeured limo and whisking her over the Golden Gate Bridge to his friend Steven's house for dinner. It was a relaxing evening of good food, good wine, and good company. Keiko felt a little less uneasy. After all, the Bank of Hawaii employees stood behind Kaushal. These nice people in a nice house in a beautiful neighborhood were his friends. He couldn't possibly be a conniving thief. The term con man stems from the words confidence man, and confidence is exactly what Kaushal was trying to reinstill in Keiko. And it was working. Maybe that's why Keiko reacted the way she did when a new hiccup presented itself 2 days later.
So basically by now this is the pattern, right? We know that Kaushal's about to screw her over even more.
Exactly. Kaushal told Keiko that his family's money couldn't be transferred due to her claim on the 3 forged checks and the freeze on his Bank of Hawaii account. He also told her that there was, a super easy way that she could rectify the problem.
What was that?
So he said all Keiko had to do was sign a 1-page legal form called a liability of indemnification. The form was written in typical dense legalese, which Keiko did not fully understand. But she checked with the Bank of Hawaii, who allegedly confirmed that her signing the form was the only way for Kaushal's account to be unfrozen. Keiko thought it was just an annoying formality, something that was necessary for her to get her money back post-haste. She agreed, and Kaushal took her to her notary to sign it.
Oh, that's not good.
Yep.
I feel like we're watching a horror movie, and this is where I'd be screaming at the screen, "Don't take off running into the woods! It always ends horribly!"
But before the horrible ending, Kaushal had more tales to spin. He claimed that due to the looming danger posed by his sister's kidnappers, Keiko would be safest back in Japan where the bad people couldn't find her. Driven by his concern for her, Kosal promptly bought her an airline ticket, and, in fear for her life, Keiko left.
Oh, man. I mean, I can totally see the writing on the wall. But what did Keiko say happened from there?
So after returning to Japan, Keiko learned the deposit to her Wells Fargo account had been dishonored due to insufficient funds. And not only that, but because she'd also signed the liability form, the claims that she made to get her money back from the Bank of Hawaii were no longer valid, which means that Kosal's Bank of Hawaii account, which had been frozen with Keiko's money in it, was now free and clear for him to access. So at this point, she'd been 100% conned out of $508,000 and didn't have a leg to stand on.
Having somebody swindle you like that, I think would feel, well, it's like you've been assaulted. And, you know, as a parent, you're trying to keep your kids safe, and all of a sudden you've let the fox into the hen house.
Right.
Wow. This poor woman.
I know. It's awful. And here's the interesting thing that Keiko told me. She said there was an employee at the San Francisco Wells Fargo Bank who'd overheard Kosal make a call to the Bank of Hawaii, and she allegedly told Keiko to sue the Bank of Hawaii because the bank was in on the planning of things. And obviously I have nothing to corroborate this, but I did ask Keiko if she knew the employee's name.
So did she ever send you any information?
She did. Like a couple days later, she emailed me the name of a woman, and she has a super unique last name. So it only took me one search on Facebook to find her. So I DM'd her. Who knows if she's ever A, going to read it, or B, get back to me, you know.
Can't imagine she's going to get back to you. The whole Bank of Hawaii thing seems really fishy.
Right?
That's crazy.
I know. And, you know, here's the other thing that I find really odd. So it might be one thing to have that much camaraderie with bank employees if it was small town wherever. I can imagine walking into the bank and everybody waving. But Kosal is not from Hawaii. He's from Nepal. He was only there for a few months and is somehow thick as thieves with the employees from the bank. Like, I don't get it. It's weird.
It's super weird.
And I mean, I feel like his same Nepalese royalty story, that was his, in with the bank people. I don't know. It's the only thing I can think of, though, right?
It makes sense.
In the wake of being conned out of $508,000, Keiko was calling anyone who would listen to try and get her money back. She called Hawaii PD, Homeland Security, the FBI, and, having nothing to lose, she also called San Francisco PD. A detective there heard her out and made a few calls to the police in Hawaii, but he was unable to shake anything loose. So at that point, she hired a lawyer in Honolulu and filed a joint lawsuit against the Bank of Hawaii and Kaushal Narula. The charges included unfair business practices and negligence, among others. Unfortunately for Keiko, she lost the case against the bank because she willingly signed the one-page indemnification of liability form. Now, I've seen the form in the court records, but honestly, I don't entirely understand it. So I turned to Susan Kang. She's a former prosecutor from Orange County. I was hoping she could explain how this one form cleared the bank of any and all wrongdoing. I guess my question is, Kosal doesn't represent the Bank of Hawaii, he's a customer. Keiko's a customer of Bank of Hawaii.
Right.
How does another customer of a bank get another customer from a bank to sign a document that makes the bank free and clear of everything? I don't understand how that happens.
I think what happened was this Bank of Hawaii felt they were defrauded, and when they got the parachute to not be held liable, I think they took it. I mean, there's no evidence that the Bank of Hawaii knowingly allowed Narula to defraud it. But unfortunately, she cleared the bank of any responsibility, and therefore she lost all that money.
Right. Yeah, I don't think they knew. I think when she came forward and said, that signature is not mine, they were like, oh, comparing, signature A to signature B. Yeah, you're right. They were also defrauded. It's not as if Kosal was helping the Bank of Hawaii out. He needed the bank off the hook in order to unfreeze his account so he could keep what he'd
already stolen. He gambled that Keiko would see the dense wall of legalese, the promise of resolution, and his reassuring smile and fall right into his trap. And honestly, I might have done the same thing. Like, all right, let me just read you a bit of the agreement that Kaushal gave her. I, Keiko, agreed to indemnify and hold harmless the Bank of Hawaii, its officers, directors, employees, parent companies, affiliates, agents, successors, assigns, and agents from and against any and all losses, damages, costs, and reasonable attorney fees resulting from or related to claims, liabilities, suits, actions, or proceedings arising out of the Bank of Hawaii having paid funds to Kosal Narula at Keiko's request. I mean, I barely understand that, and English is my first language.
It's just, to me, that just sucks so bad because she is one person and they are an institution. And I get it, like legally they're fine and they're free and clear, but man, it just makes me so mad.
I think the law and the system holds people responsible for reading the contract. And I have a lot of compassion for her, but at the end of the day, the court is telling her, hey, it would have been fine. You would have gotten your money back if you hadn't signed that letter of indemnity.
Keiko held out hope for some justice. The court relieved the Bank of Hawaii of any responsibility, but would they hold Kaushal accountable? The answer was yes. They determined he was the sole responsible party for the loss of her money and brought a judgment against Kaushal to the tune of $1.4 million. But to this day, she hasn't received one red cent from him, and deep down, she knows she never will.
To me, this is a perfect example of just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not after you. Like, this is my worst nightmare as a woman, as a parent, in terms of, being robbed and feeling completely insecure and feeling like the walls of protection I've placed around my family have been breached.
Yeah, I can't imagine how helpless she must have felt.
I can't imagine trusting anyone ever again.
Totally. Which is why she's not comfortable talking about it. She trusted our financial system. She trusted Kaushal. Like, I get it. And I think you're right. Why would she trust anyone? Anyone including us. Remember how we got into this whole story? The entry on the grid that described Keiko's attorney as being convinced Kaushal had supernatural powers? Julie and I kind of laughed it off at first, but honestly, after talking to Keiko and digging into her story, and seeing how effortlessly Kaushal made stealing more than $500,000, I kind of get it. I couldn't ask Keiko's lawyer why he felt that way because, well, you heard him hang up on me. So I did the next best thing. I asked Matt Smith, the journalist he'd given the quote to.
The quote in the story was, I attribute it to the supernatural. He's evil, he's like a vessel, and if people don't treat it like it is, he's going to continue doing what he's doing.
It wasn't just that Kaushal was evil. It was that he seemed unstoppable. So the question, of course, is, was he? That's next time on American Hustlers. American Hustlers is a production of Frequency Machine, produced in association with True Crime News. This episode was written and hosted by me, Kim Kantner, and produced by me, Julie Golden, and Avi Glajanski. Editing and sound design by Amy Durant. Mixing and mastering by Julian Kwasniewski. Executive produced by Stacy Book, Dominique Ferrari, and Avi Glajanski. Featuring the voices of Vivek Bola as Kosal Narula, William Updike as Danny Garcia, and David Song as Miguel Bustamante. Music courtesy of Jingle Punks. Archival recordings of Kosal Narula and Danny Garcia provided by Sherry Loiter, Don Martinez, and Kim Hansen. Archival recordings of Craig McCarthy and the Palm Springs Police and Danny Garcia's recordings of Judge Downing and the Court Clerk via DesertSun.com. The book, Until Someone Gets Hurt, by Sherry Loiter and Tyson Wrench, with research assistance by Don Martinez and Kim Hansen, was an invaluable resource for us as we made American Hustlers. You can find a link to it in our show notes. Special thanks to Kathy Lombard, Matt Smith, Andy Wells, Tyson Wrench, Sherry Loiter, Don Martinez, Kim Hansen, Bob Moeller, and Christine Anotu at Warner Brothers. If you like this episode and want to hear more stories like this, please leave us a review and tell everyone. It really helps other people discover the show. For more information on this and all of our series, check out frequencymachine.com.